Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just like clinical precision.
Right, right. Yeah,
Right.
like a totally binary state.
Exactly. Like you break your arm, the doctor looks at the x-ray, points to that jagged white line on the film and just says, there it is, broken.
Yeah, the bone is undeniably fractured. The path forward is obvious.
Right. Broken or not broken. You put a cast on it, you restrict the movement, the bone heals, and eventually you take the cast off. Problem solved.
Because we really crave that kind of visibility.
We do. We want a clear problem just neatly paired with a clear solution.
Yeah.
But the moment you step out of a sterile clinic and into the world of human behavior.
Oh, yeah, especially when you're dealing with social safety nets.
Right. Extreme poverty, the bare mechanics of survival. That x-ray machine just shatters.
It really does. We are no longer looking at a static bone.
No.
We're dealing with an incredibly complex living ecosystem where, you might think you are applying a helpful cast, but you are actually cutting off the blood supply to the rest of the body.
And that is the exact diagnostic muddy water we are wading into today on this deep dive.
It's a fascinating mission we have today.
It really is. We are looking at a situation where the government tried to apply this massive, incredibly expensive cast to the problem of rural poverty. And they accidentally suffocated the patient's immune system.
Which is just wild to think about.
Specifically, we are looking at India's National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, or NREGA, as it's known.
And we should clarify, this is not just some small pilot program. NREGA is the world's largest rural employment initiative.
It's massive. I mean, on paper, it is designed to be the ultimate safety net. It guarantees 100 days of paid work to rural villagers.
Right, so the government essentially steps in and says, hey, if the crops fail, you don't have to starve.
Yeah, and you don't have to flee your home. They say, we will pay you for 100 days of manual labor right here in your district.
It sounds like an absolute triumph of modern policy, doesn't it?
Totally. You throw free government money at the poorest people to make them richer. What could go wrong?
Well, it sounds like a triumph if you assume human beings operate like, rows on a spreadsheet.
Which they absolutely do not.
Right. The reality on the ground delivered a stunning rebuke to the policymakers.
A total face slap.
Exactly. When researchers actually tracked the realized welfare benefits of this massive cash injection, the intended benefits shrank. And I mean, they shrank by a staggering 55 to 70%.
Okay, let's unpack this. That number just stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
Up to 70% of the expected benefit of this free money just evaporated.
Oof, gone.
The wages were paid, the government budgets were spent, the labor was done. But the actual lived welfare of the villagers didn't improve nearly as much as the raw math dictated it should.
No, it didn't.
And that brings us to the core question of today. Why does free help shrink?
So to answer that, we have to look past the government program itself.
Right. We have to look at the people.
Exactly. We have to crack open this brilliant, highly complex study from Stanford University researcher Melanie Morten.
Yeah, she didn't just look at the top-down policy.
No, she used incredibly detailed household-level panel data from rural India. And she used it to map out the invisible, ancient survival webs that keep these villages alive.
You listening to this might think, throwing money at a desperate problem automatically solves it.
It's a natural assumption.
It is. But you are about to see why human nature and the ruthless calculus of survival makes it infinitely more complicated.
It's so much more complicated.
So to understand why the NREGA policy failed to deliver its full promise, we have to understand the ecosystem it disrupted.
Let's go down to the ground level.
Let's do it. Let's look at the survival game in these semi-arid Indian villages. Because when the sky refuses to rain, you basically have two choices. You either run or you rely on your neighbors.
And the fundamental rule of this ecosystem, the rule that policymakers entirely missed, is that you cannot do both effectively.
Wait, really? You can't do both?
No. But let's establish the environment we were talking about first. These are agricultural communities entirely dependent on the monsoon.
Right. The rain dictates everything.
Exactly. They face terrifying existential income swings. If the rain falls, they eat. If the rain doesn't fall, the harvest is ruined.
And there's no modern financial infrastructure to catch them, right?
Yeah.
Like, we aren't talking about farmers in Iowa with federally subsidized crop insurance.
Oh, far from it. No lines of credit at the local bank, practically no formal credit markets here at
Oh,
all.
no emergency credit cards to max out?
Nothing, no savings accounts to draw from. So human ingenuity steps in.
As it always does.
Over generations, these communities developed two distinct weapons against starvation.
Okay, let's break those down. What is the first weapon?
The first weapon is leaving. Economists call it self-insurance. It's basically temporary migration.
Leaving the village entirely.
Right. The data shows that in these villages, about 20% of households will do something drastic. They will send an adult family member, usually a man, away to an urban center to find temporary wage labor.
And this is not just to earn, like, a little extra spending money, is it?
Not at all. The income that migrant sends back becomes, on average, 50% of the entire family's survival cash for the year.
Wow. Half of their entire livelihood depends on that one person navigating a distant city.
It's an immense burden.
So that is weapon one. You take on the risk yourself, you go to the city, you bring back cash.
Right.
What is the second weapon?
The second weapon is cooperative insurance, or village mutual aid.
Helping each other out.
Right, because agriculture is highly localized. Maybe your field got wiped out by a pest, but your neighbor, whose field is slightly higher up the hill, managed to pull in a decent harvest.
Okay, I see.
Under cooperative insurance, that neighbor shares their surplus grain or cash with you.
Knowing that next year the roles might be reversed.
Exactly. It is an informal, invisible network of risk sharing that binds the village together.
Okay, so on the surface, this sounds like a remarkably resilient system.
It does.
I mean, if I am a farmer, I have a double insurance policy. If the rain fails, I can rely on my neighbor's surplus. And if the whole village has a bad harvest, I can send my brother to Hyderabad to earn cash.
Sounds like a bulletproof setup.
Totally. Why wouldn't I want both?
Because the existence of the first option actively destroys the second?
Wait, what?
Yes. This is the central, totally counterintuitive revelation of Morten's research. Temporary migration and village mutual aid cannot harmoniously coexist.
They actively destroy each other.
Yes, they are what economists call endogenously jointly determined, which basically means the mechanics of one directly alter the mechanics of the other.
Okay, I need to push back on that logic because it defies common sense.
Let's hear it.
Let's step away from farming for a second. Imagine a group of adult siblings who all agree to pool 10% of their paychecks into a shared family emergency fund.
Okay, mutual aid.
Exactly. That is our mutual aid. If one sibling loses their job, the fund pays their rent.
Makes sense.
Now, let's say one of those siblings gets an incredibly lucrative side hustle that pays entirely in cash, and they don't have to tell the rest of the family about it.
Okay, that is the migration option.
Right. Why does the sibling having a side hustle ruin the family fund?
That is actually the perfect analogy because it highlights the core friction here. Limited commitment.
Limited commitment. Unpack that for me.
Let's look at the sibling with a lucrative side hustle. Before the side hustle, if they had a good month, they gladly put their 10% into the family fund, right?
Yeah, because they knew they might lose their primary job next month and need the family's help.
Exactly. Their commitment to the group was high because their dependence on the group was high.
Right. They needed the safety net just as much as anyone else.
But now they have this independent outside source of income. Their outside option has vastly improved.
Okay, I see where this is going.
So when they have a good month at their primary job and the family comes asking for that 10% contribution to help another sibling who got fired, the dynamic changes.
The sibling with a side hustle looks at the math and thinks, why should I give my money to them?
Yes. If I lose my job next month, I don't need the family fund anyway. I can just rely on my side hustle.
Oh, wow. So their dedication to the collective pool plummets.
Completely.
Because they don't need the family as desperately, they are less willing to sacrifice for the family.
And that is exactly what happens in the village. The mutual aid network only functions if everyone knows they are mutually dependent.
Right. We're all in this together.
But the moment a farmer realizes, hey, if I have a terrible harvest next year, I don't actually need to beg my neighbors for grain. I can just hop on a bus to the city and find day labor.
Then their willingness to share their current surplus evaporates.
Yes.
It's not even about actually leaving. Just the psychological awareness that an escape route exists makes you a less generous neighbor today.
It alters the entire power dynamic.
The mere option of self-insurance burns down the cooperative insurance. Like, imagine you were jumping out of a plane. You have a parachute and you have a jetpack. Awesome, right? But what this study says is that the moment you turn on the jetpack, It literally sets your parachute on fire.
That is exactly right. The village can demand less from you, because if they demand too much, you will simply walk away from the network entirely. You'll take your grain, keep it for yourself, and rely on the city next year if things go south.
This totally reframes the narrative around rural to urban migration.
It really does.
Because we have this culturally ingrained idea of urbanization as an aspirational journey. You know, the ambitious young man packing his bags, leaving the dusky village behind to chase the bright lights. Modernity, a permanent new life in the city.
Yeah, that's the story we always hear.
But when you look at the raw data in this study, that narrative completely falls apart. They aren't moving to chase the glorious dream. They are being chased out by the clouds.
The data is brutally clear on this. The correlation is undeniable.
What does she find?
Morten cross-referenced historical rainfall data with the household migration rates. And the trigger isn't ambition, it's precipitation.
Wow. It's literally the weather.
When the summer monsoon rainfall drops by just one standard deviation.
Which is, what, a notable dry spell?
Yeah, a dry spell, but not a biblical once-in-a-century drought. Just one standard deviation drop. The village migration rate spikes by 3.6 percentage points.
3.6% just from a dry spell. The weather literally dictates the exodus.
It is entirely reactionary. It is a frantic, dynamic adjustment to a short-term crisis.
And that's why we have to discard the idea of this migration being a permanent relocation, right?
Absolutely. Morten's panel data, which tracks the exact same households over multiple years, reveals a fascinating pattern of what we might call yo-yo migration.
Meaning they bounce back and forth.
Exactly. Fully 40% of the families in these villages migrate at least once during the study period.
40%. That's almost half the village.
But on average, a migrant household only spends half their time migrating.
Only half.
Yeah. They go to the city when the rainfall fails. They engage in intense, difficult labor for an average of about 193 days. So just over 6 months.
And then what?
And then, the moment they have enough capital or the seasons change, they go right back home.
They come right back. So they are using the massive urban labor market of a city like Mumbai or Hyderabad the exact same way you or I might use a high-yield emergency savings account.
That is a highly accurate way to view it.
You only dip into it when your car breaks down or your roof caves in, but you don't pitch a tent and live inside the bank.
Right. It is a temporary shock absorber. Because despite the romanticized view of city life from the outside, the reality of being an informal temporary migrant laborer in an Indian megacity is grueling.
I can only imagine.
It is dangerous, the living conditions are often appalling, and the social isolation is severe. They don't want to be there.
They want to be home.
Exactly. Their home, their identity, and their primary economic assets are all back in the village.
So they endure the city to save the village, which makes logical sense. But here is where the data takes a genuinely dark, almost sinister turn.
Oh, this is the really wild part.
We established that the option to leave weakens the village bonds. But the study looks at what happens when the migrants actually return with the money.
Right.
You would think that a village with a high rate of temporary migration, a village that is constantly sending people out to harvest city cash and bring it back, you would think that village would be wealthier, more stable, and therefore more generous with each other.
Yeah. That is the assumption most development economists make. Bringing outside capital into a closed, impoverished system should lift all boats.
But the data reveals the absolute opposite.
It really does.
The villages with the highest rates of temporary migration have the absolute worst informal mutual aid networks.
The worst.
The easier it is for outside money to flow in, the colder and more fractured the neighbors become.
Yep.
Why? If I am bringing a stack of rupees back to a starving village, why does that destroy the village's willingness to help each other?
Because to understand that, we have to dismantle a very persistent, very naive myth about what village mutual aid actually is.
Okay, shatter the myth for me.
We like to project this pastoral, utopian vision onto traditional communities. We think of it as pure, selfless charity. Good-hearted neighbors sharing a warm bowl of stew out of the kindness of their hearts.
Right, the idyllic village life. And Morten's data suggests it isn't warm and fuzzy at all.
No, it is not charity. In the behavioral models Morten applies, village mutual aid is revealed to be a highly calculated, ruthless system of hidden debts.
Hidden debts.
It functions less like a community potluck and more like a strict financial contract enforced by intense social pressure.
Wow.
And the most glaring proof of this is how the data tracks historical transfers.
How so?
In a system of pure charity, if you were starving today, I help you, regardless of the past.
Right, because I'm a good person and you're hungry.
But in this network, the amount of help you received in the past negatively predicts how much help you will receive today.
Wait, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around the cruelty of that.
Yeah.
If the monsoon failed 3 years ago, and my family was starving, and the village elders organized a transfer of sorghum to keep my children alive,
Yes.
if the monsoon fails again today, they are less likely to help me now.
Much less likely, because you are already in default.
In default.
You are carrying a massive hidden debt on the village ledger. You cannot infinitely draw from the well. This mutual aid is a brutal game bound by reciprocity. If you were helped yesterday, you are trapped into paying it back today.
That is a profound paradigm shift. It is not a safety net. It is an informal line of credit with crippling social interest rates.
That's a great way to put it.
If you take the help, you are indentured to the network until you clear the balance.
And this brings us to what the data shows about the returning migrants. Let's look at the raw numbers, the 60% rule data.
Let's 60% rule.
Morten tracked the granular income and consumption spending of these households. When a family suffers a crop shock and successfully sends a temporary migrant to the city, their overall household income jumps by a very healthy 30%.
Okay, 30%. So the system worked. They took the risk, went to the city, earned the money, and now their income is up 30%.
Right.
You would assume their quality of life, their consumption of food and goods would scale somewhat proportionally.
You would assume that. But when Morten tracked their total household consumption, it only went up by 60% of that newly acquired cash.
Wait, so if they brought home an extra 100 rupees, they're only spending 60 rupees on their own family's survival.
Exactly.
Where does the missing 40% go? They don't have access to mutual funds. They aren't stashing it in an IRA.
That missing 40% is immediately bled out into the village network.
Bled out.
It is confiscated, essentially, to pay down those hidden social debts.
Oh, that is chilling. So the migrant goes to the slums of Mumbai, they sleep on a concrete floor, they work brutal manual labor for 6 months. They scrimp and save every rupee they can.
Yeah.
They finally take the bus back to their village, exhausted but proud that they have saved their family. And the second they step off the bus, the village network surrounds them and says, hey, remember 3 years ago when we gave you that bag of grain?
Yep.
We see you have some city money now. Time to pay up.
That is exactly the dynamic. And it answers your question about why villages with high migration have the worst mutual aid.
Right.
Think about the friction this creates. The returning migrant feels they earned that money through immense personal suffering in the city, but the village demands it based on historical debts.
So resentment builds.
Absolutely. Furthermore, if a village has a high rate of migration, you have people constantly leaving and returning. The population is in flux.
Right. The network is constantly shifting. You don't know who is going to be there tomorrow.
And a system based on tracking complex, long-term, informal debts requires intense stability and constant peer monitoring.
Like a small town where everyone knows everyone's business.
Exactly. If half the village is bouncing back and forth to Hyderabad, tracking who owes what to whom breaks down, the trust degrades.
That makes total sense.
The limited commitment we talked about earlier hits a breaking point, and the entire informal insurance market collapses.
Which brings us to a massive, screaming paradox for anyone trying to design policy.
Oh, yes. This is the ultimate policy trap.
Let's pretend you and I are development economists working for the state government. We look at these poor, desperate farmers. We see they are relying on temporary migration to survive horrific weather shocks.
Right.
The journey to the city is dangerous, transport is expensive, and finding a job is hard. So what is the most logical, benevolent, progressive thing we can do? We make it easier for them.
It seems so obvious.
We subsidize the bus tickets. We pave the roads to the city. We create urban job matching centers. We lower the friction of migration.
It sounds like Development Economics 101. If labor is trapped in an unproductive area during a drought and capital is in the city, you build a bridge between them. You lower the cost of mobility.
Right. You make the jetpack cheaper.
Right.
But the painful, almost unbelievable truth hidden in Morten's structural modeling is that if we make bus tickets cheaper so poor farmers can reach the city more easily, the overall welfare of the village drops.
It drops.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
How on earth does making it cheaper and easier to find a survival job actively harm the community?
This forces us to confront the deep, uncomfortable mechanics of human cooperation. We have to revisit the solo flight option.
The solo flight. Okay.
We already established that the mere existence of an escape route weakens your commitment to the village. Well, what happens to human psychology when you make that escape route cheap and easy?
The temptation to act selfishly gets stronger.
Drastically stronger. When travel costs drop, a farmer's ability to survive a disaster entirely alone goes up. Their individual solo flight value increases.
Okay, I follow.
Because they know they can just hop on a cheap, subsidized bus tomorrow morning if the monsoon fails. Their willingness to tolerate the suffocating debt-based demands of the village mutual aid network today simply vanishes.
So if I am sitting on a small pile of surplus grain, and my neighbor whose crops failed comes asking for help,
Before the new paved road and the cheap bus tickets, you would grit your teeth and give him the grain.
because I knew that if I starved next year, my only realistic option was to rely on him in return.
Exactly. The high cost of travel trapped you both into cooperating. But now,
Now you look at your neighbor, you look at your surplus grain, and you calculate the odds. You think, if I starve next year, I don't need this guy. I don't need to put up with this village ledger. I'll just buy a 50-cent bus ticket to the city.
the external option has become too attractive. The incentive to share your current surplus evaporates.
And because everyone in the village is making that exact same calculation simultaneously, nobody shares. The network shatters completely.
And here is why that collapse leads to a net mathematical loss in human welfare.
Yeah, explain the loss. Because surely the cheap bus ticket helps someone.
It does. But that village insurance network, despite being ruthless, despite being built on heavy social debt, was actually highly efficient at smoothing out localized shocks.
It kept people alive.
It was a localized net that caught the most vulnerable people and kept them at a baseline level of survival. When you lower the cost of migration, you give the strongest, most capable individuals a fantastic lifeline, but you destroy the collective safety net that everyone else relies on.
Oh, wow. The strong individuals grab their cheap bus tickets and fly away.
Yep.
And the weakest individuals, like the elderly, the sick, the ones who physically cannot migrate, they're left stranded in a village where the culture of sharing has been eradicated.
Precisely. You give the individual a better escape pod, but the thrust from the launch obliterates the mothership.
Obliterates the mothership. That is brutal.
The structural model proves that the destruction of the mutual aid network happens faster and causes more widespread deprivation than the scattered economic benefits provided by the cheaper bus tickets. You accidentally engineer a more fragile community by giving them an easier exit.
That is just, it breaks your brain a little bit. You try to build a road to prosperity, and it ends up acting as a drainpipe for communal trust.
It really does.
But wait, you mentioned that the strong individuals fly away. Let's actually look at the demographics of this. Let's zoom in on exactly who is getting on these buses. Because when you look at the raw statistics of who migrates and how much they make, the math looks entirely backwards.
It does look backwards. If you were to just glance at a raw spreadsheet of incomes in these Indian villages, without understanding the underlying mechanics, you would conclude that migrating to the city is a massive financial mistake.
Really.
You would look at the data and say, why is anyone doing this? It makes them poorer.
But we just spent the last 20 minutes establishing that they do it to survive. How can the math say they're poorer?
They are poorer on paper because of a classic, dangerous statistical trap. Selection bias.
Oh, selection bias.
We have to look at the demographics of who actually leaves. Morton's data shows that it is not a random lottery. Families with a higher number of adult men, and specifically families with significantly less land, are the ones initiating temporary migration.
Okay, let's unpack those two factors. Why is having adult men the deciding factor?
Because in this specific cultural and economic context, men have a vastly unfair advantage when it comes to the cost of migrating.
You mean like train tickets are cheaper for men?
No, I mean the social, physical, and psychological costs. Arriving in an informal urban slum with no housing, navigating a chaotic and often exploitative day labor market, sleeping in highly vulnerable conditions.
Oh, I see.
The barrier to entry and survival in that environment is significantly lower for adult men than it is for women or children. The physical risk is lower, the social stigma is non-existent.
So they are the ones equipped to take the punishment of the city. What about the second factor? Why are the landless families the ones leaving?
That comes down to the concept of opportunity cost.
Okay.
Let's say you own 10 acres of prime agricultural land. Even in a terrible drought year, you have massive assets to protect. You have fields to maintain, irrigation ditches to clear, maybe livestock that needs constant tending to survive the dry spell.
Right, you can't just walk away from that.
If you abandon that farm and leave for the city for 6 months, your farm falls into complete ruin. Your opportunity cost of migrating is incredibly high. It makes no economic sense for you to leave.
But if you are a tenant farmer, or you own zero land,
Then you have zero opportunity cost. There's literally nothing tethering you to the village when the rain stops. You have no assets to protect. So the moment the shock hits, the landless young men are the first ones on the bus.
okay, that paints a clear picture of who is leaving. But I still don't understand why the raw data makes it look like a financial mistake.
Because of the cognitive reversal required to read the data correctly, think about what a naive researcher does. They look at the village data, and they take the average income of all the families who sent a migrant to the city, and they compare it to the average income of all the families who stayed home.
It sounds logical so far.
And when you run that simple comparison, the families of the migrants actually have less money overall than the families who stayed behind.
So the people who stayed home are richer. Then why would anyone ever subject themselves to the misery of the city slum?
Because the people who stayed home were richer to begin with.
Whoa.
They are the ones with the 10 acres of land. They are the ones who had a buffer against the drought. You absolutely cannot compare the desperate, landless young man who fled a failing crop to the wealthy landowner who stayed behind and then confidently declare, look, the landowner has more money, therefore migration is an ineffective strategy.
I see. That is the definition of selection bias. It's like standing outside a hospital, comparing the health of the people walking out of the emergency room to the health of people walking out of a luxury gym and concluding, wow, hospitals must be terrible for your health. Everyone coming out of them is sick and injured.
That is a perfect analogy. You are completely ignoring the state they were in when they arrived.
Right.
It's a fatal analytical flaw. To find the truth, Morten couldn't just compare migrants to non-migrants. She had to use complex structural modeling to compare the migrants to themselves.
Compare them to themselves. How?
She mathematically eliminated the selection bias by calculating what the migrant would have made if they had been forced to stay in the village during the drought.
What economists call the counterfactual.
Right, their virtual income. And when you look at that true apples-to-apples comparison, the reality of the situation emerges. Migration is not a mistake. It is hugely life-savingly profitable for the desperate people who engage in it.
How profitable?
Morten calculates that it effectively doubles the virtual income of the families left behind. Doubles it. If that young, landless man had stayed in the parched village, his family would have survived on half the calories, half the resources they ended up with. Migration is a massive net positive for the individual household making the choice.
It doubles their survival cash. That is incredible. But, and there's always a massive but in this data.
There is.
You noted in our pre-show discussion that before we pop the champagne and celebrate migration as the perfect individual solution, we have to look at the staggering risk involved.
Yeah.
You called it the 33% slap.
Yes, the 33% flap.
Walk me through the actual lived reality of this gamble.
We have to strip away the sterility of the economic terms. Temporary labor mobility sounds very clean. The reality of the informal labor market in India is terrifying.
It's not a corporate retreat.
No. We've established that migration is a lifeline, but it is absolutely not a guaranteed paycheck. When these men travel to the city, they are incurring immense upfront costs.
Just to get there.
Morten mathematically estimates the physical toll, the danger, the travel expenses, and the brutal living conditions as being equal to sacrificing 21% of a family's total yearly consumption.
Wait, 21%. Just the sheer friction of the journey and existing in the slum drains a fifth of their theoretical resources in terms of hardship and cost.
Yes. They start in a deep hole. And here's the most terrifying statistic in the entire study.
What is it?
33% of the migrants who take this desperate gamble go to the city, sleep in the slums, search frantically for day labor on construction sites or in markets, fail to find enough consistent work to outpace their living costs, and end up making absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
They return home empty-handed.
That is horrifying. I mean, imagine you are already on the brink of starvation. You take 20% of your family's yearly food budget, you bet it all at a casino, knowing full well you have a 1 in 3 chance of losing everything.
That's the reality.
That is not an economic strategy. That is a desperation play. They aren't traveling to the city for a salary job with its signing bonus and HR benefits. They are rolling the dice on the chaotic, unforgiving street corners of Hyderabad.
It is a profound existential gamble. And think about the compounding tragedy when they lose.
Yeah. What happens then?
When they fall into that 33% failure rate, they return to their village utterly broken. They have consumed vital resources just to travel. They have earned nothing, and now, humiliated, they are forced to throw themselves on the mercy of that exact same ruthless, debt-tracking mutual aid network that they were trying to escape by migrating in the first place.
Oh, man. And as we established, that village ledger is going to track that debt mercilessly. They are trapped.
Completely trapped. It is a razor's edge of survival, where one bad roll of the dice in the city can doom a family to years of social and economic servitude in the village.
Okay, so let's take a breath and look at the puzzle pieces we've assembled on the table here. We have desperate migrants taking massive gambles because the weather forces them to. We have a fragile, highly calculated, debt-based village safety net. We have the psychological reality that simply having an escape route weakens your willingness to help your neighbor. And we have the counterintuitive fact that making travel cheaper actively destroys village trust.
That's the landscape.
Now, we need to put it all into the grand equation. This is where Morten's work elevates from, observation to prophecy. Let's look at the mathematical trade-off.
This is where the structural dynamic model really flexes its muscles. Morten didn't just passively observe these things happening in the real world. She built a highly sophisticated mathematical universe.
Like a simulation.
Yeah, a simulated environment governed by the exact behavioral rules she observed in the data. And in this simulation, she could basically play God. She could tweak the variables of reality and prove the exact trade-offs.
Okay, I love this. Let's play God with the data. What is the first variable she tweaked?
First, she asked a utopian question. What would happen if we could magically alter human nature and make the village's mutual aid network 100% perfect?
Perfect mutual aid.
Right. What if we removed the limited commitment? What if everyone trusted everyone completely? There were no hidden predatory debts, and all surplus resources were shared perfectly to smooth out any weather shocks.
A perfect socialist utopia at the village level. If you have that, what happens to the desperate casino gamble of migration?
The need to migrate instantly plummets by a massive 21 percentage points.
Wow.
People don't just stay home, they want to stay home. The data proves that the primary driver of this grueling migration isn't a desire to see the city, it is the failure of local insurance.
That makes profound logical sense. If a farmer knows their neighbors will catch them when they fall, without holding a predatory social debt over their heads for the next decade, they will absolutely refuse to take that 33% chance of failure in the city slum.
Exactly. If the collective parachute works perfectly, you don't need to strap on the dangerous, unreliable jetpack.
I love that. But utopias don't exist.
No, they don't. So Morten ran the opposite simulation. She modeled the poison pill policy we discussed earlier.
The cheap bus tickets.
Right. What if, instead of magically fixing human trust, you do what governments actually do? You lower the cost of migrating, you build the highways, you subsidize the buses, you make the jetpack cheaper. What happens to the village in the mathematical model?
The crowding out effect. The jetpack burns the parachute.
Yes, and we can quantify exactly how badly it burns it. Economists measure the strength of a safety net by looking at how closely a family's consumption tracks their income.
Okay, wait, explain that tracking.
Think about it. In a perfect safety net, if your income suddenly drops to zero because your crops died, your consumption of food should stay perfectly level because your neighbors immediately feed you. The correlation between your income and your consumption is zero. You are totally insulated from the shock.
Right. I make $0, but I still eat the same amount of food. And if you have no safety net, your income drops to zero and your food consumption drops to zero. You starve.
Exactly. So when Morten lowered the cost of migrating in the simulation, the correlation between a farmer's income and their consumption spiked by 8 percentage points.
Let me translate that into plain, brutal English. Their safety net just got 8% worse. If they have a bad crop, they literally starve 8% more than they used to.
That is exactly what it means.
Why? Because, as the model showed, the strong individuals mentally check out of the village network the moment they see the cheap bus tickets. Providing a better exit strategy directly and measurably suffocates the mutual aid network.
And this leads us to the grand, tragic synthesis of the math. Morten ran her simulation to calculate the overall welfare of the society. In a fake, theoretical world where village mutual aid doesn't exist at all, a world of pure, isolated individuals fending for themselves.
Lowering travel costs is a fantastic policy, right?
Yes. It boosts overall welfare by a massive 24%. It's a huge win.
Because if you are already totally isolated, giving you a new tool is pure upside. There is no network to destroy.
Exactly. But we don't live in that fake, isolated world. We live in the real world, defined by fragile human networks, deep historical debts, and complex collective trust.
And in that world,
When you lower travel costs, the damage done to the mutual aid network is so severe, so rapid, that it completely overwhelms the economic benefits of the chipper travel. The net mathematical result of making it easier to migrate is a welfare drop of 9.9%.
that is the statistic that keeps you awake at night, a near 10% drop.
Yep.
In a society bound by informal safety nets, making it easier for an individual to save themselves mathematically results in nearly a 10% increase in human suffering overall. That is a profound, flashing red warning light to any policymaker who thinks they can just parachute a modern economic solution into an ancient social structure.
It is the tragedy of unintended consequences quantified down to the decimal point. You give the individual a better lifeline, but the collective safety net is destroyed so badly that the net result is negative. You accidentally engineer a poverty trap while trying to build an escape hatch.
Which brings us finally back to where we started, the real-world policy that sparked this entire investigation. Because we don't just have to rely on hypothetical computer models of cheap bus tickets.
No, we have reality.
We have the real-world example of a government trying to play savior, the NREGA program.
Let's bring all of this deep context back to the NREGA rollout. The Indian government steps into these highly complex, fragile villages and says, we have a solution to your weather shocks. We will guarantee 100 days of employment at a set wage right here in your district.
They're essentially providing a massive, concrete baseline income floor.
Yes.
And if you don't understand the invisible web of debts and migration, it sounds like an incredibly logical, flawless plan.
Yeah.
You stop the desperate 33% failure rate casino gamble of migration, and you inject stable cash directly into the village ecosystem. It should be a total victory.
And to be fair, it does have a massive immediate effect. Morton's data shows that the introduction of NREGA caused temporary migration to drop by 14%.
14%. So people didn't need to flee to the city as often. The policy achieved its primary surface-level goal. It kept people home.
But having journeyed through the dark psychology of limited commitment, we know there is a secondary effect.
A lethal secondary effect. We have to look at the nature of this new government safety net. NREGA is a rigid, bureaucratic, externally mandated program. And as we've seen, injecting a rigid external option into a fragile, debt-based ecosystem of trust has devastating consequences.
It's the sibling with the side hustle again, but this time the side hustle is guaranteed by the federal government.
Exactly. The presence of NREGA completely crowded out the warm, flexible, but fragile village mutual aid network.
Let's walk through the psychology of that collapse. If I am a farmer and I have a terrible harvest, I no longer have to endure the humiliation of begging my neighbor for grain and taking on a massive social debt. I could just go dig irrigation ditches for the government program.
Your outside option just vastly improved.
But more importantly, look at it from your neighbor's perspective. If you have a decent harvest and your neighbor's crops fail, you no longer feel the intense social obligation to share your surplus with him. You look at him and say, why should I give you my hard-earned grain? Go dig ditches for the government.
Wow. The existence of the government floor provided an excuse to destroy the interpersonal floor.
Exactly. The collective empathy just evaporates because the state has outsourced the responsibility of caring for each other.
Okay, so let's tally up the final score of this massive intervention. The policy steps in. It successfully kills the desperate drive to migrate by 14%. But in doing so, it shatters the ancient village trust and the informal insurance market. What is the final mathematical reality?
When the policymakers designed NREGA in the capital, they looked at the millions of rupees they were going to pay in wages and calculated a massive theoretical boost to rural welfare.
Like looking at the spreadsheet.
Right. But because they treated the villagers like static numbers, because they didn't factor in the dynamic human reactions, the limited commitment, the hidden debts, they were blindsided.
Totally blindsided.
They didn't realize that their government money was going to cause neighbors to stop sharing food with each other and cause migrants to stop sending remittances from the city.
Right.
When Morten ran the true numbers, accounting for the destruction of mutual aid and the drop in migration income, the overall welfare gains of the policy were 55 to 70% lower than the raw cash injection suggested.
Up to 70% of the value just gone. Vaporized by human nature.
Vaporized.
It's like the government stepped in and built a giant, expensive concrete pillar in the middle of the village to hold up the sky. But the process of installing that pillar accidentally knocked out all the ancient interwoven wooden beams that were holding up the walls, and it blocked the emergency exit to the city.
That is exactly what happened.
Yes, the concrete pillar is standing. The roof hasn't totally caved in. But the house is fundamentally more unstable and isolated than it was before they started, quote-unquote, helping.
It is a tragic, perfect analogy. The policy didn't fail to deliver the money. It failed to understand that the people receiving the money were already engaged in a highly evolved, high-stakes game of survival. When the government carelessly changed the payouts of the game, the players immediately changed their strategy to protect themselves, and the collective suffered.
As we wrap up this deep dive, looking at Morten's work forces you to confront a much larger, frankly terrifying reality.
It really does.
As modern markets, cheap transport, and massive well-intentioned government welfare programs inevitably push their way into traditional rural spaces all over the globe, we're forced to ask a really dark question about the future of human cooperation.
What is the primary friction you see there?
It's the ultimate trade-off. Yes, we are gaining the freedom to survive as isolated individuals. We have cheap bus tickets to the city. We have rigid government work programs. We don't have to rely on the suffocating, debt-based judgments of our neighbors anymore.
Right, autonomy.
We are trading mutual dependence for individual autonomy. But in our desperate rush to become independent,
Yeah.
are we permanently destroying the warm, interconnected human communities that have kept our ancestors alive through crises for thousands of years?
That is the core philosophical tension of development. Autonomy is liberating, but autonomy is also deeply fragile. A government program can be defunded. A bus route can be cut.
Exactly. And when that happens, when the next unprecedented disaster hits, a climate shock that the government didn't plan for, or a budget crisis that zeroes out the NREGA funds, or a pandemic where the buses stop running and you can't escape to the city, when the modern systems fail and the villagers look around at each other for help, will they find that they have entirely forgotten how to save each other? Because the ancient network of trust isn't something you can just turn back on with a switch. Once it shatters, it's gone.
It is a heavy, sobering thought. It highlights why we cannot view economics as just math. Understanding these hidden rules of human behavior, looking past the obvious binary solutions, and respecting the invisible architecture of a community is the only way we can actually design policies that make the world measurably better, not just disruptively different.
We have to treat the whole patient, not just put a blind cast on a broken bone. NREGA was a cast that ignored the circulatory system. But thanks to researchers like Melanie Morten, who are willing to dive into the granular, muddy waters of how human beings actually interact when their lives are on the line, we are at least starting to understand how the invisible nervous system of survival functions.
It's incredible work.
And that is definitely something to chew on the next time a politician or a pundit promises you a beautifully simple solution to a deeply complex human problem.